Now, the land question continues to be a major issue in South Africa, with the vast majority of, array and just arable land that is still in the hands of the white minority. One of the fundamental questions being asked, though, is how do we solve the land issue without causing further racial divisions? Now, a book titled Land in South Africa, Contested Meanings and Nation Formation is trying to answer this, as well as other relevant questions. It was launched on Wednesday by the Mapungubwe Institute for Reflection, and we speak to Mrs. Bulela Mabasa, who is a member of the President's Advisory Panel on Land Reform, about this. Mrs. Mabasa, thank you so much for your time. A lot of themes we're seeing here pertaining to land reform. How does this book address them directly?
Thank you for having me. I think this book is an important development in the land reform discourse. You will recall that when the ANC government came into power in 1997, they formulated the 1997 policy, which was supposed to give and breathe life to how land reform issues were supposed to be dealt with. We then also had a high-level panel report that was done in Parliament that did the diagnosis around all the issues and failures on land reform, and that was followed by the Presidential Advisory Panel, which I formed part of, which report was launched in June 2019. So what we're seeing here with this book, it's a step back. I think it's a point of reflection, which says, let's move away from the land question as a matter that is sensationalized, a matter that we all say is emotive, and let this be an introspective moment and look at land reform as an enabling tool for social cohesion to build a kind of nation where all South Africans could find a place of and sense of belonging. So in this book, we trace circumstances today under different myriads of situations that continue to be excluded from the land reform discourse. Whether you're talking about women,
Right.
who are urban farmers that are trying to not only make a living, but to assert their autonomy, or whether or not you talk about the laws itself, the laws themselves, that we're still in a situation where we have pre-colonial and colonial laws that form part and parcel of our property law system, that we have not stepped back to look at whether or not they are enabling for land reform to happen. So this book is a really, in my view, and of course I'm biased, it's a breath of fresh air, because it says to us that it takes away the land reform discourse
Right.
from only, Parliament, academia, and intellectualism. And it says, let's begin to take the narrative into the hands of all South Africans.
And speaking of which, I just want to jump in there, if I may, please, Ms. Mabasa, because speaking of all South Africans, you also take what you refer to as a citizen stakeholder perspective. You mentioned women before, but I also know that you also touch on community-owned land. You also touch on labor tenants. Why was this perspective particularly important?
It was particularly important if you put into context that the figure is that over 31 million South Africans interact or deal with land and property outside of the formal registry system. What that means is that you have the overwhelming majority of people in this country that are not made provision for in our laws and also in policy making. We've seen, for example, ordinary South Africans making their contributions in Parliament, for example, on whether or not Section 25 should be amended. And that debate can easily very much become a exclusive debate, for lawyers. So here, when it was important that we actually, get into the grips with what are labor tenants on the ground actually thinking around this issue. We've also seen, for example, commercial developments
Right.
that happen in community-owned land where communities' interests, are not considered, where they aren't engaged properly, when they are relocated, without having a sense of what happens with their sense of being, what happens to their graves, what happens to their cultural practices and heritage. So this book really says the land reform question mustn't just be answered by issues around productivism or markets. We have to delve deeper and look at how can we use this narrative as a means to unite and build a new not a new South Africa, but a new nation where everybody feels that they have a stake in it and a real reason to rally behind the need for land justice.
Well, thank you so much for talking to us. Sounds like a book to definitely get your hands on. Mrs. Bulela Mabasa, thank you for your time.